Welcome back to Take a Leap and Transform, a neurodiversity journey. I'm your host, Joseph K. Muscat. Are you ready to take a leap with me? Part of the challenges with being neurodivergent is how executive function is so linked to our various abilities to process information and our productivity. What further adds to this is the frustration that we may not have been effectively been given the skills we need to develop and practice the various ways and how to manage our executive function. Now imagine if you are in your mid-30s, juggling your professional and family, and you get a late diagnosis that brings clarity, and yet you don't know where to start or to who to turn to aid to building your new skills and development. Well, let me introduce you to my latest guest, Genie Love. Genie Love is an executive function coach, equipped neurodivergent professionals with personalized tools to take control of their time and attention so they can get stuff done and achieve their goals. Genie has been trying to figure out how to stay focused and attentive, how to decrease procrastination, how to manage to-do lists, and generally how to get things done her entire adult life. She knows firsthand what it's like to be diagnosed, mess, and excited to be involved in the current neurodivergent movement. Jeannie brings 20 years of experience teaching high school students with ADHD and autism, as well as a master's in educational leadership to coaching individuals as well as businesses and organizations. Welcome, Jeannie. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I want to kick off from with our chat with your experience in the education system, and you tell us about your time assisting young students.
Yes, I started in 2002 as sort of an aide for some students in a high school who sort of had some significant learning disabilities. And really enjoyed working with those students and really found a passion for helping kids navigate life. And as my career evolved, I moved into teaching and then into teaching students who had more mild learning disabilities, and really found that I most connected with the students who had ADHD and autism. I really enjoyed helping them figure out how to manage life. And a lot of that was manage your time, prioritize, break large assignments into smaller tasks and set goals and achieve those goals, how to advocate to figure out what you need and then how to advocate for that with the teachers and the other adults in your life. And so I just stayed and I continued to do that for a while. That job took me to South America for a little while, and I had a student who has autism that I worked with there for a few years. And then he was his time was coming to an end overseas, and we were ready to come home, and it was COVID time of 2020. And so that was kind of when my teaching career ended, and an evolution and a path to coaching began.
Okay, fantastic. Now, you had mentioned in that you had helping them navigate and manage their time in their life. So yes. Were they having particular difficulties in managing those areas and adapting it into the school structure, or vice versa, the school structure not adapting to them?
Well, I think it was, I don't necessarily think the school structure at the high school level really is much adaptable. So you're expected to kind of figure it out. And so that was part of my job, was to help these kids figure it out. So many of them are involved in extracurricular activities, and then just the intensity of each class and the high expectations for each class. And then on top of that, you maybe think more slowly, or maybe you have a reading disability and you are going to need some technology to support that, or maybe you don't understand if you have autism, then you don't really understand what the expectations are. How do you know when a sort of an abstract writing assignment, how do you know when it's done? How do you even get started? those kinds of things. And so it was really like at the high school level, it was really about just navigating the system and figuring out how to stay on top and get the things done.
Okay, interesting. Now, you had mentioned as well working with mild students, but as well through our prep talk, you had mentioned that you were more called towards more extreme cases.
I think what I really connected with, and when I look back at my own story, so you heard in the introduction that I've been trying to figure out how to manage my own time and attention my whole life. And as I see where I am now and follow the path all the way back to even college and high school, I really I wouldn't say that I gravitated to the extreme cases, but I gravitated definitely to the ones who needed the life coaching. And some of my students, even I think maybe were misdiagnosed as having a learning disability, and what they had was a family disability. And for me, it was navigating life, figuring out how to get the thing done. And that was where I connected with the kids to the point where I often, well, not often, but there would be times during an evaluation where the observer, the administrator would come in and say, okay, you're doing a great job connecting with kids, relating to kids, helping them solve the problems of life, but perhaps you're missing some reading instruction or something like that. So that for me was, just always where my passion has been. And even if you go all the way back to college, my first degree was as a physical therapist, and I found the most challenge and joy and interest working with patients who had brain injuries like strokes. And so there, at the same time, you're also helping to figure out how can I rewire some neuro pathways to help them relearn these skills of walking and climbing stairs and things like that. So I'm just sort of a brain nerd that way.
Fantastic. I like that you said you're a brain nerd. That's it.
I am.
That's fantastic. What drew you towards the career to shift into coaching, and why adults, not students?
So when we returned in July of 2020, my husband and I agreed that he was going to work. He had been a stay-at-home dad while we were in South America. He was going to return to work, and I was going to be available in case our daughter needed to be homeschooled. And but we live in a pretty rural area, and she's in a pretty small classroom, and so actually she didn't really need to be homeschooled much. So then it was me trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my time, and I had picked up some tutoring for some kids who were homeschooled, but my daughter, who is now 9, so at the time she was 7, has some behavioral and emotional issues. And so for me, a goal was to be emotionally and physically available to her and for what she needed. And I just knew that going back to public education wasn't going to be the best thing for me to be the best parent that I could be. And so that kind of ruled that out. And we now know, and she has been diagnosed as having ADHD. And so, but at the time she wasn't. And so I was researching and trying to figure out, it was kind of a great moment for me to I was online studying what are my skills? What are people looking for? I, did some job interviews. And what I decided was that it wasn't going to be best for me to work with students because students are available after school, and that's when I'm parenting. And so I had to let go of that idea. And even I'm in the mountains of the US, and even on the East Coast time, it just wasn't going to work. So then I just continued to research, and I found that adults are either being diagnosed by a clinician or they're diagnosing themselves as having ADHD or autism. And I thought, okay, well, this is something that I know and have spent 20 years honing in my skills with high school students, and I wonder how that would translate with adults. And so I kind of put myself out there as a coach, an executive functioning coach, and it turns out that, yeah, people do want that help and that what I know is useful to them. And so I've been doing that for a while and really enjoying it, and love hearing about my clients' goals and their passions and how, coaching them and how they can like start to make more progress on those things.
You've hit on a couple of things there that I actually want to touch upon later in the interview. But let's take a look here. What do you see as the particular differences when working with students and working with adults?
The difference is that adults come to me and students are given to me. And so the difference is, if you look at high school students, generally speaking, they're tired. They've been, dealing with the school system, which is not set up for them. And they're tired of just coping and managing and struggling. And it's just survival, really, by the time they get to high school. And so you're a cheerleader, like, we're going to do this together. We're going to get through this together. Adults come to me because they're ready to take control of their lives. And so it's much more active, and they're much more open and ready to work on the strategies that I have for them. They also come with a very clear vision of what they want, which is very individualized. It's not just surviving high school, but they have professional and personal goals. And so for me, that's really fun to get to be a part of their lives and to, share strategies that can get them there. So, they're much more motivated, much more active, much more ready to move forward than some poor, tired high school kids.
Well, that's really interesting in the aspect that the students, they're trying to navigate and get through high school, right? And they're not, to a certain extent, they have a vision of graduating and entering their dream career. But even though that's the end goal, that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is to survive the education system. And as you pointed out, survive an education system that, frankly, is not willing to adapt to them. They want them to adapt to the education system. So more not inclusion, more, what's the word I'm looking for? More integration. That's the word I'm looking for, versus inclusion.
Yes. And when I say that I knew that I wouldn't have the energy from public education, it has nothing to do with the student. It's about the other stuff. So managing the other teachers involved in their lives and the other pressures. Those are the things that and then, in the US, the mounds of paperwork that take you away from what you really want to do is just to hang out with kids. And so me leaving public education and being tired has absolutely nothing to do with students. I still love high school kids, but it's the other stuff that becomes exhausting.
Well, that takes us a little bit in a different direction. So if you don't mind, I want to kind of go there. You mentioned the working with and managing teachers and the amount of paperwork, the bureaucracy of it, frankly. How is that in regards to neurodivergent students? I mean, because you mentioned that the students, you enjoy working with students, you want to help the students. But then there's all this bureaucracy that interferes. Does that interfere with you being able to coach and guide students and give them the attention that they need?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're not getting the best because you're being pulled. I mean, when they talk about, like, if we just go with the paperwork side of things and the accountability, the legal accountability from that side, I mean, if you want to talk about dotting every I and crossing every T, it's really insane and a burden. And it's not set up to really support them. It's a mess. So there's that. And then there's, what the kids need to learn. What are their goals? What are their priorities? Isn't the goal of education? I have a lot of opinions about education. I also have a master's degree in educational leadership. So I have been involved in education from so many angles and for such a long time that I have actually some very strong opinions. But yeah, so the expectation is, get this math done, get this history done, get this speech written, get this. And we're missing, like, what do they really need? What are their goals, and what do they, I have questions about graduation requirements. Like, I understand the purpose of graduation requirements to expose kids to so many things. But if you are a neurodivergent person and you've got this very specific path, are all those requirements the best thing for that student? I think there's a lot that could be revisited in education. And unfortunately, I'm just not the person to tackle that right now.
Understandable. And I don't have your educational credentials or experience, but I equally have a lot of opinions about the education system. Okay, so there's a lot of paperwork. The education system really doesn't take into account the neurodivergent student. And are the requirements, as you stated, really the best way or the best requirements for that particular student? And obviously, of course, this opens the Pandora box of, what are you saying? Are you saying that we need to lower the requirements, give them a pass? And of course, that's not what you're saying. What you're really saying is why are we not focusing on where they're strong and providing support and where they're needed? And those requirements can be changed, but still have a higher level that will help them get to where they need to go and be at the same playing field. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, I think you nailed it. Like, what are their strengths? We spend so much time focusing on what are their weaknesses and how are we going to, deal with that, really, in that way, as opposed to, like, these are their strengths. Let's just push as hard as we can on that. And, like, what does reading look like if they continue on this path? What does math look like? What are their math needs if you continue on this path? What are their language arts needs if they continue on this path? And so then you get into, like, project-based learning, which I think is something that's very interesting to discuss, which is where you have this area of interest, and then all of that is built into what they're motivated and interested to study. And then they get to, like, take your passion and your motivation to the next level and see where they can go with that.
Interesting. That's an interesting point. The excuse the pronunciation, the HAJE learning, HAJE-based learning?
Oh, no. Project.
Project-based.
Project-based learning, which is where you would, okay, I'll give you an example. My daughter is sort of interested in architecture and design. And so they had a project where she's in 4th grade. So they had to design a house, and you had to put the rooms in, and you had to, do the multiplication of the blocks. So it's this many blocks long, this room is this many blocks wide, and you have to do the multiplication. So, and she ended up building this elaborate 4-story house that had, like, a parkour room and a movie room, and it was fun. So could you take this? She's excited to do this project. She has ADHD. It's very hard for her to focus on something that isn't incredibly motivating to her, but she saw this all the way through. So let's go with that. Let's research some architects and read about architects. Let's write about architecture. Somewhere in there, I'm sure there's science that we can incorporate as well. And so that's more of the project-based learning. She is learning all of the core subjects around this area that is motivating to her. And it's very individualized for each kid.
Okay, that's very interesting. So what you're basically saying is on the project-based learning is you're customizing a curriculum for that child based on what is motivating them. And then in that customization, you're customizing the material that they would need based on what's motivating them, but at the same time incorporating all the other important educational modules into that project that will further motivate them Like, so you're kind of like, you're putting little cookie crumbs
Yes.
in regards to those subject matters that will link to their interests.
Absolutely. And I think the immediate response to this would be, how can I possibly create a customized curriculum for every student in my class?
Mhm.
And I think it doesn't have to be that hard. I think that I know that there are courses out there on how to do that by, prestigious universities. And so it's like any change, it would be just like earth shattering in the beginning. And there's growing pains to it. But I don't think like she would be during, language arts piece, she would be researching an architect and somebody else might be researching maybe they're very interested in the military. So maybe they would be researching an important historical military figure, or just it could be anything. And it's a shift in how we do things. It feels, I don't know. I can't really imagine I can't imagine what it would be like, but I can only speculate on what somebody's experience to jump into this would be. But there's research out there on it. You could do it. Schools are doing it.
That's interesting. That's quite fascinating. And I agree with you that if you think outside the box, you'll be able to incorporate this into the classroom. That would be more successful to students, in particular neurodivergent students. So how, because you mentioned it, and you mentioned that your daughter is going through that. So this is one particular project. How receptive have you found the education system in that regards to incorporating project-based learning?
Well, I haven't gone anywhere with that because I think from my experience of being in education, I think it's we could never possibly do that kind of situation. As I was reevaluating where my career was going and what I was planning to do, at that time I was actually enrolled in a project-based learning class to learn more about how to implement it myself. And I had to let go of that because when I thought about what my priorities were to my family and to my daughter, I just knew that taking on something this big wasn't the best use of my energy at the time. So I really have not followed it any further.
Okay, not
than my own personal ruminations.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally understand that. I'd be curious to find out though. But you said that certain aspects of the education system is starting to incorporate it. I'm just curious to find out how receptive that is in regards to on a wider scale. So my last question on that then is, you had mentioned in regards to, is the curriculum in regards to graduation the appropriate curriculum or requirement, should I say, for a neurodivergent student? Can you give an example?
Yes, I can. I worked with a student who was very, I don't know exactly how you describe this, but he was very like IT oriented. So he could build a computer from scratch. He was constantly tinkering, like he built himself a new special keyboard. Just knew that he was going to go into like cybersecurity, something like that. His brain just takes him that direction. His passions take him in that direction. The way he spends his time takes him in that direction. And so then great, and he's going to excel. He's brilliant. He's going to do so well in this. So then to watch him just struggle and really just hate himself over trying to do deep literature analysis at a senior level, I question, like, what are we doing to him? I don't know I think for someone who's going to go to a university and it needs to be exposed to a wide variety of curriculums, fantastic. But for him, I just don't know that was worth what it did to his, self-esteem, his feelings about school. I don't think it's worth it.
Hmm.
So that's an example of someone
Interesting.
who probably could have benefited from a team really evaluating what was necessary for him to graduate high school.
Right. Because again, it's trying to build that well-rounded student and give them that exposure. But then, of course, does the student really require all that exposure, especially if that's an area where they're struggling in, but they're being prevented from graduating when they're excelling in another area.
Or looking at education, post high school education and just how awful high school was. So why would we even consider going on to more education? And so, just kind of sucking that out of him. However, he did go to work for cybersecurity, a small cybersecurity company, and did incredibly well. So well that he actually left that job to go to a technical school where he can continue to learn more about that. So that's really great for him.
It is, and that's a good way to end it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's producing a more productive environment where he will want to continue his education, and from that job led into him wanting to do that. A different experience. That's a different, more positive experience than what the education system had provided him. And it's interesting, kind of the segue a little bit.
Yes.
Dr. Temple Gadin has recently, I just read an article, recently came off a book tour. But during her book tour, she was arguing in her book and in this particular interview that the education system is killing visual learners. And the reason being is that we're taking away all the hands-on technical educational requirements that a lot of neurodivergent students tend to thrive in. And that's being taken away from them because it's not being provided in the education system. And she's saying it's time to recall that back in, because a lot of neurodivergent talent is struggling in the education system because they're not having that as an alternative resource.
I had a student who was incredibly gifted with music. He was an incredible musician. And he had to have that in order to be his best self, because otherwise the rest of school was really taking away his self-esteem. And so this goes into, so many of my adult clients now carry the baggage from struggling so much in high school to adult life, which I found. And so they have some self-esteem issues. That is part of the work that we sometimes often have to do together.
So that brings us then coming back to the main topic then, because you mentioned the self-diagnosis, and that's really an interesting phenomenon that's happening. So with working adults who are self-diagnosed rather than getting a medical one, what are your thoughts on why that's occurring?
I would expect that it is a function of time, like if you can get online and there's a checklist, and there are a lot of resources available now for you to kind of, or do an assessment to say, yeah, I think I do have autism. I think I do have ADHD. I don't know that that's an official diagnosis. I mean, I think it does provide some sense of, okay, it's better now, I understand who I am, some closure on some, previous decisions or struggles in your life. But I think a lot of people are just like, okay, that's probably me. And now let's figure out what that means. And so I don't know that there's a strong reason to get a diagnosis.
Okay. So then, are you finding from your experience that these self-diagnosed individuals are correct and are facing the challenges where they need to develop new perspectives and skills to assist in their coping?
Yeah, so an example would be that I had a woman who came to me and she said, I think I'm autistic. And so I just clarified for her, I'm not qualified to, to officially diagnose you. But the more time we spent together, the more she told me about how her brain worked, the more I said, you have a lot of things in common with the other autistic people that I have worked with. And so for her, then there was a lot of acceptance. She's grateful for understanding who she is and is ready to move forward with her life, but then also grieving for all the time that she lost, not understanding who she was and being able to take action. And I know there was more to your question, but maybe you can ask it again, because I lost myself in my story.
Not a problem. So you've answered the first part where they've gotten the diagnosis, and with working with you, you're finding that the self-diagnosis seems to be quite accurate. And then the second part of the question is, are they finding that the skills that they're lacking is, and that you're helping to develop, is aiding them to be able to cope?
Yeah. Yes. And I would say with my clients who have quote unquote ADHD, I'm not sure that all of them technically would. That one specifically too, because of our very distracted time that we are in, with so much going on and constant reminders from our phone of the things that are going on. So I'm not sure that all of my clients would technically have ADHD, but the strategies do help. And so, generally they come to me because they feel like they don't have control of their time and they don't feel like they have control of their attention. And so it's so easy to just go on autopilot through the day, going from one problem to the next problem, one email to the Slack message to the next reminder to the text from your spouse or whatever. And you can do that, but then it's very hard to make progress on your goals, whether they're professional or personal goals. And so we just developed some strategies on how to rein that in. And there are like some very specific strategies that I coach them on, but then also a huge part of what I do, both in controlling your time and attention, but then also coping maybe with some self-esteem or imposter syndrome issues, is I incorporate mindfulness as part of my coaching practice. And so mindfulness can help you with your attention. It can help you with your focus. It can help you with being okay with your struggles, what you have struggled with in the past, and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, had initial meeting with a client today, and, just here's a couple of things for you to try. And, she was very excited to leave and to try them. So
there's a couple of things there. The aspect of that we live in a very distracted world. There's no doubt about that. It's also interesting, the aspect as well is, from my experience with interacting with neurodivergence and with my own experience, is this feel of, as you put it, loss. There's so many years that have been lost because of not having this understanding earlier in life, not having the skills taught to us earlier. And I think that's an important aspect, because we fail to realize that these are skill sets that haven't either been effectively taught to us or not taught to us at all, especially when it comes to being a neurodivergent individual.
Yeah. And I think you can go then back to the education system that we were talking about earlier, which just assumes that you're going to learn these life skills, that just assumes that you'll learn how to take notes, that just assumes that you will learn how to regulate your emotions. I'm very excited in the US that there's this social emotional learning sort of curriculum that many schools are adopting and adding as part of how they teach and what they teach. Because in the past, it was just an assumption that you would be able to just complete this project without having to teach how to break it down into steps or whatever. And so the life skills, the problem solving, the managing your attention, the managing your emotions, the procrastination. People who have executive functioning issues sometimes just can't even figure out how to get started. Or you have really great vision for what the end is going to look like, but the steps to get there, it's hard to visualize them all. And so those abstract thinking skills aren't taught as much as how to learn how to read, how to learn how to do math. I say for my daughter, my example is she has a lot of emotional regulation problems. And it's like if a student, we very explicitly teach reading now to children who are dyslexic. And so if they can't read, we teach them how to read. If they don't know how to behave, we don't teach them how to behave. We just tell them to behave. And that's where my daughter doesn't know how, because she's a good kid who wants to do well. She just doesn't know how to teach those things.
Yeah, it's very fair enough point. There's also the aspect of concentration. We tell kids to concentrate, but we don't teach them how to concentrate. And then, of course, we fail to realize in the aspect of respecting how they concentrate versus how we want them to concentrate. And then, of course, where they decide where they want to put their attention, right? So we look at ADHD. If they're bored at something that doesn't motivate them, they're not going to do that, versus something that does motivate them, that does interest them. And we don't encourage that. We expect them to come back to what is boring them. So we're not adapting again to how that person or that student wants to concentrate and where they want to put their focus. And it's also funny in the aspect as well, you mentioned the assumption. It's the same thing happening. A mid-30s, mid-40s individual who comes to the conclusion they need to get a diagnosis. They get a diagnosis, or even prior to getting diagnosis, they're told, we can give you a diagnosis, but if you're looking for after support, we don't provide that. So again, it's that assumption that you'll be able to figure it on your own, which isn't the case, because if that was the case, someone like you wouldn't be needed.
Right. And they would have figured it out a long time ago. But yeah, and that's where I've learned coaching comes in, is you figure out, what is it that I equate it to kind of like, taking a college class. Like you are getting someone who knows something and has experience with this area where you're struggling with. And so why not get some help?
So I'm really curious, from the people you have coached, what are the various professions they are in? And you mentioned earlier in regards to their self-esteem and self-image. So how is that?
I have clients who work in pretty much everything: social working in schools, IT. Some of them are entrepreneurs, their own business owners. So in fact, I would say almost half of them have their own businesses. So that's kind of interesting too, for whatever reason. And I can't necessarily speculate, but, or I could speculate, but I don't know if that would be helpful. So yeah, they're in all sorts of careers, and they do carry some self-esteem baggage from just always not having it together. I was always the one, well, not me, but this is something that they might say, like, I'm always late. I'm always behind. I can't ever get all the things done. Everybody else has it together, and I'm, the one struggling. And of course, I think rationally, we all know that nobody has it together. But, we all know, if you look back on those school years, that whatever we had to deal with carries over for a pretty long time. Those are some pretty impressionable years. I had a conversation with a client who, I don't know exactly what he does, but it's some sort of IT support. And he had gotten a new job. And, I was telling him, I was like, well, that's great. You are in an industry where you pretty much can call the shots. Like you are in such high demand that That's amazing. I'm so excited that you are in this position. And he was kind of blown away. Like his self-esteem was pretty low. And he was like, yeah, I guess so. But didn't even understand the value that he has in being skilled in this area that is in such high need that he could leave that job and find another one tomorrow that pays more. This is, what's kind of heartbreaking for some of my clients.
Yeah, that's quite understandable. I know you kind of mentioned and touched upon it earlier. So let's go a little bit more in some detail. What are the skills these adults are having difficulty with, and what do they need to develop?
Executive functioning skills include things like getting started if the project seems overwhelming, which also kind of includes procrastination, organization, and sort of that short-term active memory can be a challenge. Time management is a part of that. Handling stress and emotional regulation, so being able to solve problems and make decisions under emotional stress or pressure. Those are all executive functioning skills. Focus and attention for sustained periods of time. Seeing projects all the way through to completion. Those are all kind of executive functioning skills.
Right.
And when I start working with clients, we start small. Like, let's just take control of your day. Let's take control of your week. Let's find chunks of time where you can begin to work on the things that you might be missing. Some of them it's exercise. Some of them it's a hobby. It might be going to sleep at a regular time or eating well. What does it look like to fit all those parts into your daily and weekly schedule? So we start with strategies for that. And as we go along, things will fall apart, as they always will. And so then we have some strategies for resetting and coming back. And mindfulness comes into that a lot, of letting go of what has just happened and, sort of hitting the reset button. So we do that. Then also some strategies for like sustained attention and focus, but also how to keep going when it's a task that's incredibly difficult for you, unmotivating. I'll give you an example. For me, it's writing. I don't enjoy writing. And so for me, it's like just the tiniest chunk, like I'm going to sit here, I'm going to write for 17 minutes. I'll pick some random number often, which kind of triggers my brain. And then how to take a short break and then come back for 17 more minutes. Those kinds of things. Managing to-do lists, that's another thing that is part of what my clients are dealing with. So many thoughts. They call it, and I would too, call it noise going around in your brain, just so many thoughts and ideas, and how to just kind of quiet the noise in your brain. Those are some of the things I provide strategies for my clients.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm curious, you mentioned the handling stress and emotional regulation.
Yes.
How is that affecting a neurodivergent individual?
I think that for example, maybe your to-do list is just so overwhelming and you're not making progress on it. And so that can create like a stress response, which might be avoidance, or it might be kind of a panicking kind of thing. So that would be one example. And this is where mindfulness then comes in. How do we slow down, narrow our focus on what needs to be done right now? What's the next thing that needs to be done? So how to quiet the noise and all the chaos that's going on in your brain. Bring yourself back to right here, right now. What's the thing that needs to be done? It might be when you're feeling overwhelmed by really anything in life. And so how do you handle that stress? And I do a lot with mindfulness. So and we practice it in a lot of ways. And so just bringing you back to the present. I'm right here. I'm right now. This is the thing that's happening. I can let all that noise, all that stress, all that chaos go, because all there is just this thing that is happening right now. So those are some examples of emotional regulation and how I coach on that.
Okay. And then once you go through the coaching practices with your clients and you provide these strategies, we had mentioned the self-esteem. How is their self-esteem after they start developing these skills and they start seeing the results of these new skill sets?
Yeah, they definitely feel better. They can see accomplishment. They can see that they have control over the things that are holding them back, whether it's time, whether it's focus, whether it's being able to make progress on your long-term goals. So we take all that and we just break it down into small pieces. And it's, we meet weekly in the beginning. Maybe even twice a week, like one will be a coaching session, and then one might be like a monitoring of your calendar and your schedule. And then they start to take control of that. And then we need to meet less often. So maybe it's twice a month for the one-on-one sessions, but then we can keep the weekly calendar check-ins if that's really helpful to you. But at the same time, we're taking these like long-term projects and together we're figuring out what are the pieces that we can start to break it into, set our own goals, meet those goals, or adjust if something has come up and we couldn't meet that goal. And then you can just kind of see that you're making progress on what's important to you. And then you feel like you're in control. And so that feels really good.
This has been a very, Janine, an engaging conversation. And I want to end off with, how can people reach out to you?
I have a website. It's genielove.coach. And I'll spell it for you. It's GENIELOVE.coach. And you can also email me if you want, Genie@genielove.coach. And yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there as well.
Well, thank you, Genie, for being an amazing guest and sharing your experience and how you are supporting the neurodivergent community. I will put her details in the show notes. I also want to thank you, my continued listeners, for your amazing support of this podcast. I want to share with you a new program that I put together to bring awareness to up-level the skills of employers and management. The workshop aids in building more inclusive environments in the workplace and in developing the skills of management to be more engaging with their teams. Reach out to me on my website to learn more about this amazing program. I also encourage you to continue to support this podcast so I can bring you more amazing content. You can do so by visiting my Patreon page, where you can connect with me directly in several options. Till next time, take a leap and transform.